Welcome to the LowCarbMD podcast. No one is beyond help. No one is beyond hope.
As we have always said, we are bringing you medical information and cutting-edge science, but none of this is medical advice. Please seek out input from your own doctor.
Hello and welcome back to the LowCarbMD podcast. Tro, we have our competition here. Not really.
Just got a
great podcast. They're doing great stuff. So yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm absolutely excited to be here. We have Jackie Fletcher, who's had an amazing personal journey. If you haven't seen pictures of her transformation, if you haven't listened to her podcast, it's a Fabulously Keto Podcast. And you know, I've quite an amazing personal journey and personal transition. If you wanted to find her, you know, fabulouslyketo.com and on all social media platforms, I think it's Fabulously Keto. So Jackie, we are absolutely excited to have you here. Thanks for coming.
You're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm excited to be here too.
You're the lone representative because your partner in crime over there, Louise, is taking a little nap. It's 3 a.m. for her in Australia. Yeah. It's hard. We're all in crazy time zone. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. It's lovely to be here. And I often say that you two were the inspiration for Louise to join me, because I had all intentions of doing the podcast by myself. And I listened to your podcast. It was episode 100. And I was out running and listening to it and listening to what you were talking about. And I said, Louise had been helping me in the background. And I said, I have to ask Louise. She's probably going to say no, but I have to ask her if she wants to join me. And she said, amazingly, she said yes. So that was the start of the Fabulously Keto Podcast with Louise.
Well, tell us about your journey to get there. You know, I'm glad, Tro, we finally did something good for the universe, I guess, you know, after 100 episodes, someone listened to us.
You know, that's funny. Yeah. So I'm always interested how you got here, because we know in our world, you know, keto is like a 4-letter word. That's bad. You know, we know that, you know, kind of intermittent fasting is, you know, a path to an eating disorder, quote unquote. I'm being snarky, but so how did you find your way here?
Well, actually, it was a sort of coincidence, really, and not really anything planned. So I've always been overweight from a child. I was not obese, but I was overweight. And my granddad's nickname was Cannon, after the 70s detective. So he was big, my dad was big, and I sort of grew up believing that I was going to be big. And by the time I hit my teens, early teens, I was already at Weight Watchers. I did the Cambridge diet, all sorts of diets. But I could only do them for a few weeks. I couldn't sustain it. I couldn't keep it going. When I was nearly 18, I ended up having an operation, and they removed 1.5 ovaries and a tumor the size of a soccer ball. And I think that sort of set my hormones awry. I sort of learned that now since I've been on this journey. So I was always overweight, and in my 20s I'd keep doing some diets, but I never sustained it and I never kept it up, and I just had this belief that diets don't work. What is the point? So I'd got bigger and bigger over the years. I'd also started having migraines in my mid-20s really badly. By mid-30s I was taking about, on average, 10 Sumitrapan a month. Felt like I was having several migraines a week. And I was having gallbladder attacks. Oh no, and the gallbladder attacks came later, but just general health niggles. I wasn't in a great shape. And by the time I was in my mid-40s, I weighed around 200 pounds, something like that. No, a bit more, 220 pounds. And I'd stayed there for quite a while, and it was sort of balanced and I was okay. But then from 2016 to 2017, my weight just ballooned and I went up to 231 pounds. And I put that down to stress, work, things that were going on had really sort of, I don't know, I'd put on 10 pounds in a year, which is quite a lot, I think. And so at that point, I had no intention of going on diet. I had no intention of losing weight because I kept telling myself, diets don't work. I can't do it. I'm not motivated. I can't keep it up. It's not sustainable. I'll do it for a couple of weeks and then I will go back. So I had no intention of losing any weight, except I listened to a podcast and somebody mentioned a book, which was Gretchen Rubin's Better Than Before. And in that, she mentioned Gary Taubes' book. So I bought that book the following month with my Audible credit, and I listened to it and I just thought, this makes so much sense. I understand this. And I just cut out pasta, wheat, rice, potatoes, all those things. And I started to lose weight. I was still eating chocolate. I was eating loads of vegetables. I didn't understand what I was doing really. I swapped out the potatoes for vegetables, but my vegetables were peas and corn quite often. So, but I was still losing weight. So that was great. And then a bit further along, I thought, right now I need to find out more about this and listen to the book again. And then started searching out some of the resources and then started reading other books, listening to podcasts. And that's sort of led me to where we are today.
That sounds kind of like you were invested in your healthcare. You had failed diets in the past, but it sounds now like the journey was a little bit different. You were, kind of very interested in learning more about yourself, about your metabolism, and you're hearing a different message, which is it's not your fault. It's a result of the food.
Yeah. Right.
So how do you it sounds like you were just floundering in the beginning, but how do you find your way?
So then I just kept trying things. So in the beginning, as I said, I was eating meat and vegetables, the wrong vegetables, and then I swapped in the right vegetables. I found out I needed to add in more fat. So I added in more fat, probably too much, but I do like butter. So butter has to go on all my vegetables. And just listening to loads of podcasts and reading lots of books, I think, is the way that I've done it. And then it became not about the weight anymore. So the weight was the thing that got me started. It then became more about the health. Now, I've always said for the last 12 or so years, I was saying, I want to live to 107. I'm 40 years older than my kids. I had to have IVF. And when I was 40, I had them. And so I want to see them grow up, and I want to be a grandmother and see them have kids. So I've got to live a long time to do that. But I had never given any thought about the quality of life that I would need in order to enjoy my life and do that. And so once I started on this journey, it became apparent that I need to take my health seriously if I want to be able to get anywhere near 107, but also do it in a way that I have a quality of life and I'm not sitting in a home waiting for my kids to come and see me. So, yeah.
I think that's really important. I mean, I just had this discussion with my patients also. It's that, I was visiting my mom. She's 82. Don't tell her I told everyone, but she's very young for her age. And I saw some of the people where she lives in a senior community. I was like, oh my gosh, like they can't get out of a chair. They can't do anything. They have a caregiver and they have to do all this. And people don't realize, like, at what point could we have intervened to help prevent this, or have those people out walking and doing things? Because once you start gaining weight, you get weaker and you get into this downward spiral. And again, the point I love that you're making is it's really about the health part of it, not so much the weight part of it.
Yeah. I mean, back in 2017, if I knelt down on the floor, I could not get up without leaning on some piece of furniture to help me get up. Whereas now I can put my hands on my head, sit down on the floor and get up again. That just seemed, that would have been impossible 5 years ago. Absolutely impossible. So, but I think that, yes, we've done a disservice to so many people by giving the wrong message about food and weight and the effects of food on our bodies and our blood sugar. And I, like you, my mum's coming up for 80. Don't tell her I said that. And and she is great, and she is mostly low carb. She's not as low carb as me, but she eats fairly well. I still want her to make some changes, and I want her to eat more protein, but she doesn't. And I think, you know, that message of low protein and high carbs has been criminal. I think it's criminal.
Yeah, especially when you look at the importance of muscle mass. There's study after study showing the importance of muscle mass, and for us, we're looking at it saying, yes, the more muscle mass, the lower your insulin goes too. So you get more insulin sensitive. So as we get older, we get naturally more insulin resistance. That's why when we're kids, we can eat certain things, but when we're 70, we can't do that anymore. Even when we're 50, we can't do that anymore.
Yeah, definitely. And how are we going to change it? We are changing it, you know, one person at a time. You're hitting people, we're hitting people, trying to get the message across, but there's still so many people that still buy into this low fat is bad for you, don't eat too much protein. They're still buying into that message that we've heard for the last 60 years. So changing that is taking a long time. It's like an oil tanker that you've got to turn around. It's going to take time, but we need people like you to do that, because
and people like you, right? We, you know, not just podcasts, interviews, client work, you know, nutritionists. We need an organization like, you know, in the UK, you guys have the public health collaboration. Here in the United States, you know, Brian and I are part of the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners, you know, and our job and our goal is to educate as many, you know, doctors, nurses, dietitians, you know, personal trainers, physical therapists, so that we can, you know, we can't do this alone. It can't just be, you know, Brian out in California, you in the UK, you know, you're the other half of you out in Thailand, and, you know, me here in New York. Like, we have to multiply. We have to multiply. And, you know, the amazing work with Asim Malhotra and Dr. Unwin, and I know you're a part of, you know, PHC UK, and we're trying to do that here with the society. We are doing that here with the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners. Who we now have over 500 doctors and you know, members, which is amazing.
And that's what we need, because doctors need a place where they can go to get the support that they need, because they're going against the conventional wisdom. They're going against what they've been told they have to do. So they need somewhere to go to be able to get support and validation, in a way, of what they're doing is okay to do. And I know that the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners has clinical guidelines that will help doctors, and the same with the PHC. You know, I know, Brian, that you speak at the Low Carb USA about deprescribing, and we've got a doctor here who's a partner with Dr. Unwin, who talks about deprescribing. How do you deprescribe? And these are the things that we need to happen. But I think whilst I can spread the word, it takes the doctors that people can then see, yes, this could be true, to actually start believing it. But we're still hitting people. You know, there's probably thousands of us, many more people know about it now than they did 5 years ago.
Yeah, and I think that's the important part. I was teasing with you that you're our competition, because there's really no competition. There's so many people in need. We need to have, you know, more people out there with different voices. You may have, you know, people may love your podcast is great, by the way. So, you know, they like your approach. They may not like Tro and I talking over each other and yelling at each other and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, it's really important that to listen to a lot of different perspectives and filter it out, like what you did. You say, I like Gary Taub's stuff, I like this person's, and you can't. But the problem some people run into is it's so confusing, because some people complicate it so much, you know, and someone like Jason Fung, who could speak in simple terms, but you may have Peter Attia, who's into the scientific part of it and loses people, but the scientific people love that. So it's really important to find your home, basically, like a church where you feel like, I feel comfortable here, this is where I should be, you know?
Yeah. And you know, I don't know about you, but I listen to several podcasts a week, different people with different topics, with different guests, and sometimes they're the same guests. It doesn't matter. I still listen to them again, because you can always pick up some nugget. It doesn't have to be I'm just going to listen to this one podcast, because I think we need to get different perspectives from different people. And whilst we, Brian, Dr. Brian, you've been with us, you've been on the podcast with us, and Dr. Tro, you're coming soon. But whilst we do interview doctors and people in the healthcare, we also interview people that have just been on the journey. One of our ladies, she's reduced 12 stone. Now, what's that? It's about 130 or 140 pounds. And the same as Joanne McManamy. These are massive amounts of weight that people have lost, but they're just people like me, not like you, like me.
Yeah, there's so many great people out there. They're in the battle, and they say, okay, here's what I'm doing. Some people just Google keto or low carb, or and they figure out what, reversing diabetes. And so, it's amazing what people are accomplishing. And that's one thing we got away from a little bit more, and talk to the experts and the science. And a lot of people say, we just want to hear stories about people who are struggling, and, how they turned their life around. And someone like you, your story of, going through stress, gaining weight, feeling miserable, making some change, and like, okay, I'm losing weight. I'm not even being that strict with it. And you start figuring it out, like what works for your body.
Yeah. And not only that, one of the things I often think, what have I gained? Because was I diabetic or pre-diabetic? I don't know, because I hadn't been to the doctor to find out. So I don't know, but possibly, at that weight, I could have been. And what was the downstream effect of what I was doing wasn't going to be good. My eating was out of control. I didn't feel good about myself. I had no belief in myself. Whereas now my eating is under control. It's easy to control, in fact. And I have belief in myself. I know I can do things. It's as if anything is possible now. And it's almost a shame that I didn't know this when I was in my 20s and 30s. But, we get here when we get here.
Yeah, and that's something, Tro, you brought up. I think, talking about satiety and believing in yourself and having hope. And so many people have just lost hope. Like you said, I just gave up. I tried out every diet, didn't work. And then it's like, you find your niche, you find that little path that works for you, and I think it's so important. And then sharing it and having the passion to share with other people. And, it was out. How did this translate into starting a podcast? What was your motivation? What was your draw to doing that?
I loved listening to podcasts. So I was consuming lots every week. And I just thought, wouldn't it be cool to do this? Wouldn't it be cool to speak to people like I'm speaking to you now? It would be really cool to do. So that was, in a way, and how do I get this message out to more people? How can I tell people that they don't have to be in diet prison? How can they get out and be free of food, in a way, and find food freedom? And that's how it came about. And then it's almost a way of also paying it forward. What can I do? What can I contribute to the space?
Yeah, and we need so much of that. We need people contributing and expanding the space. I mean, it's not, like Brian said, we need to put ourselves out of business because there's no end in sight. I don't think there's an end in sight. I know, Brian, your phones are off the hook. My phones are off the hook. We can't do this. We can't we have to be able to help more people. So, that battle and that struggle is so important, and it's so necessary. I wonder, has your approach to your diet changed over time? Have you found, that you started one way and have you learned something or found something insightful that made you change somewhat over the last 4 or 5 years?
I guess I have. Obviously, from the beginning, when I was eating just ordinary chocolate and peas and corn, and then I went to a place where it was a lot stricter. So I was having a breakfast and then lunch and then supper. So then one of the early things that happened was I was dropping the breakfast. It was just too much. I couldn't eat that much. so intermittent fasting came in, and now I guess I'm just slightly less worried about it. So for the first couple of years, I was really quite strict, and I wouldn't eat off plan, and I would just eat the foods that I could eat, and I was quite strict. Whereas now I'm probably a little bit less strict than I was. But when I say that, it's not every day. So tomorrow is my sister's birthday, and we've made some homemade cakes, and I will probably have some cake. But it doesn't mean that the whole thing goes out the window. I will just have some off-plan foods, and then Sunday I'll be back to it. So that's where I get a little bit less strict. So I've also done all sorts of different fasting. So from generally I do 16-8, sometimes it's 18-6. I've done longer fasts up to 140 hours. It just depends. I'm not sure that how I feel about the fasting. I always think about food when I'm fasting. It's like my body doesn't want to fast, I tell myself.
Yeah, so you kind of tinkered and adjusted between how strict you are and how different with fasting. And, I think that's important, to stay flexible and keep asking questions and keep seeing what works.
Yeah.
Brian, I know, our thoughts have changed over time too, on certain issues. And what about like kind of the relationship to food and understanding, one of the things I've understood is that this is actually lifelong. There's no escaping this, right? There's no, there are things and tools that help, but we all have to be eternally vigilant, and that's okay, right? There's things you can do along. Low carb will always be a satiating way of eating, but this idea that you can, do something for some finite period of time and then be done. When you were first talking, you said, I was so disenfranchised, I thought no diet works. And I thought to myself, well, how true is that? No temporary diet works.
No, it doesn't. Right? And no diet. See, we've got this word, we need a different word. So we've got diet as in way of eating, and diet as in way of losing weight. I would say losing weight because you can't reduce it. I've reduced the weight because I'm not looking for it, and I'm not trying to find it to put it back on. So I don't like the word lose. But when you're doing some of these conventional diets, you're actually just losing weight, and then you're going to find it again and you're going to put it back on because you don't keep up that way of eating. And quite often it's because they're not sustainable ways of eating. Whereas I find that low carb, keto, whichever range of carbs you're in, is sustainable. You can do it forever. And, you can, if you can, because not everybody can. We know there's people out there that are sugar addicts and they couldn't have that piece of cake tomorrow. They have to abstain from having that. But I'm not a sugar addict, so I can have that piece of cake and get back to my normal way of eating the next day. That doesn't bother me, and there's no emotional trigger with it. So I think you have to know yourself really and know whether you can do that. Now, Louise and I always talk about this because she's an abstainer and she has to not have it, and I'm a moderator. So we're very chalk and cheese, and so she abstains and I moderate, and so it's always a banter between us two about abstaining and moderating. And I think it's really, really important that you know whether you are an abstainer or a moderator.
Yeah, I think that's critical. I think that is the golden ticket when we figure that out for ourselves and say, yeah, I'm not the one, because I don't like zero tolerance. I've never liked that approach to say I'm never, ever going to have pizza again in my life, because people freak out, and so, but some people, if they have one piece of pizza, they can't stop, and they're off the rails for 4 months or 6 months. And I see a lot of people that just this week, I think I have 2 people that did low carb keto and they did great for 3 or 4 months, and then they fell off the wagon. And almost all the time, and you brought this up earlier, is stress related. I went through a life stress or something happened in life, and then it's hard to get back. Tro, are you hearing the same?
Look, I'm going to tell you, stress is the #1 cause of weight regain, right? Stress is the #1 cause of weight regain in our practice. But I'll tell you this comment that you guys made about, moderating or abstaining. And I think even that's changed. Even that changes, right? I used to be a moderator of nuts. I'd be able to eat nuts and still lose weight. I've noticed that over time, my ability to moderate nuts and maintain my weight loss, I've had to adjust. I've had to course correct. So I've reevaluated, even if you are a moderator versus abstainer, those relationships change over time. In fact, we have people who come into our clinic, they've never even had meat. Never even had meat. They've never had meat. And then what happens 6 months in, they're sending me pictures of bacon and steaks, right? They never had meat before. So your cravings change, your relationship to food changes, and it needs to just be reassessed.
Yes.
It needs to be reassessed, but you're absolutely right, Brian. Stress makes it all much worse. So much worse,
Even to push the point even more, I've seen people doing low carb keto, they're doing everything right and they're struggling, but they're going through major life stress. So major life stress is going to have an effect. We don't know yet, though, all the, we know about the stress hormones, we know about insulin and cortisol, all that kind of stuff, but what kind of effect is it having on your gut microbiome, or what kind of effect is it having on your cravings and if you're stressed, or if you're a stress eater, you're going to eat more. And so I think that's one of the things that we saw early on, Fro, that we noticed, is that when people started eating low carb, they cut out the bad food, their cravings got way better. They weren't craving all the bad stuff they used to, and they go, no, now I crave, like what Tro's saying, steak and different types of food, eggs or whatever. But I think there's something to that mental. I mean, and now we're seeing study after study coming up after. I still laugh about it a bit, because we took so much heat when we said, hey, people's mood seems to be, their depression, anxiety, stress, sleep, all these other things are getting better, and we're seeing it. And then all these other doctors said, you guys are crazy, you should have your license taken for even discussing this. But the studies are bearing out with what we were seeing, because we knew what we were seeing. We may not know the mechanism necessarily, but we knew what we were seeing in our patients. And when you're free of that, like, I have to eat those cookies every time, when you say, yeah, I really don't want it, when that happens to someone for the first time, they're like, I didn't even want it. It wasn't willpower. It was like, I didn't really want it. It didn't sound good to me anymore, because I know the effect it has on my body.
And the other thing is, people, and I myself was I was the same, which was, come lunchtime, I have to have lunch. I cannot go without lunch. If I don't have lunch, I'm going to get a headache. I'm going to get shaky. I didn't know what was going on in my body. I understand it now, but I didn't know what was happening. But now you tell me you can't have lunch. Okay, I'll eat later. It's not the end of the world. I know I'm not going to get shaky. I know I'm not going to feel ill. I know I'm not going to get a headache. And all these things are very different, how we feel around food. And that's why I talk about this food freedom, because you're not tied into the food anymore. And if somebody said, you can't eat for 3 days, you go, okay, I won't eat for 3 days. I want to eat, but I know I can do 3 days without eating. Not the end of the world. Whereas before, if you said you can't have lunch, I used to panic if I'd go somewhere and there didn't seem to be enough food. It was like, there's not enough food. There's not enough food. What am I going to do? But that doesn't happen anymore. Sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say about the anger and the anxiety and the anger. That was another thing that I noticed, that before I ate this way, I was always screaming at the kids, do this, do that, come here, go there. I was always asking them to run upstairs as well for me, because I couldn't haul myself up the stairs. But I noticed quite quickly that my mood just calmed down and things didn't bother me quite as much. And there's a much more peace around the house, because I wasn't in that place of anxiety and anger. I think it was an anger. But how does that become food related? I don't know. But it's true what you said, Brian. You don't know what the mechanism is, but it definitely happens.
The most common thing I liken it to is, have you ever under stress or anger said something that you regret? 9 times out of 10 people say absolutely, right? And I say, well, if you said something you regretted to somebody you really cared about, how long would it take you to apologize? And the answer is usually 10 minutes to sometimes a couple hours, sometimes the next morning, right? So how long do you think it'll take you to be free of stress-induced hyperphagia, which is like, the blood flow changes that happen with stress, which is literally taking blood flow away from prefrontal cortex, the part that gets activated when you pray or meditate, right? And it sends it to the pleasure centers, the fight or flight centers of the brain, right? Which say, go get me awesome food. Those blood flow changes take right around the same time, about an hour, a couple hours to reverse, right? So I think if you want a litmus test, tell people how long do you have to worry about stress-induced hyperphagia, the amount of time that it takes for you to say sorry, the amount of time it takes you to say sorry, to somebody you said something to under, a stressful circumstance. And those blood flow changes are real. It's not a psychological phenomenon. We've done functional MRI studies where we see the blood flow get robbed from the part that's activated literally when we pray and meditate, right? You're not your best self. And everybody knows that. I mean, gosh, my wife, I apologize, all the things in heated angers, battles over the, 20 years we've now been together. And she's dealt with me, I've apologized, I relate to that. We've said things to each other and here we are, we love each other, but, we go through these struggles and I think we all can relate to that. Stress-induced hunger is not too much different. That anger that you mentioned, it's not too much different. And Rosette, if you're hearing this, I love you. I'm sorry for every bad thing I've ever done. So if you're hearing this.
I bet you do it less now though, don't you? I bet you argue less. And so we're all noticing that there isn't as much anger around us anymore.
You want to hear something interesting? Sorry, Brian, I know you're itching to get in here, but my wife recently, shared in a blog post how her migraines completely resolved, right? With me going low carb, right? So she didn't do low carb at first. I did it for weight loss, right? And certainly like my own impulses, like Brian, I remember early on, we were talking about a lot of different, my own impulses have changed. I'm not as impulsive, and you step back and you start to really think about, the person you want to be, the physician you want to be, the whatever you want to be. And, things definitely change when you're not so addicted to dopamine. I think that's the key factor there. But yeah, my own wife's she shared that her mental health, her key, migraines, anxieties have all improved, and we've seen it. We both have experienced it.
Yeah, and I think that's a self-fulfilling thing too. Is the more chill you are, a lot of people tell me my house is so much more peaceful now. Joe Niflin was talking about that actually in the terms of food addiction, that the more addicted you are, the more you're eating terrible stuff. Plus, you feel bad about yourself and your self-esteem, but not sleeping well, being on edge, all those things just make the stress worse, and that stress cycle continues until you figure that out, right? And that's why I did Life's Best Medicine to say, let's talk about those other things, because it's important. It's not just keto and low carb. I'm telling you, there's more to the story. Part of it is you're going to stick to it better if you can deal with stress better, or not take personal offense, or not say, I had a cookie, so I'm a bad person, so I'm going to punish myself for the next month or two. When you go, okay, I had it, I enjoyed it. That's why I tell my patients, if you're going to have it, enjoy it. Don't feel bad about it, and say, hey, look, I made a decision. I did that, right? Yeah. Or maybe my impulses, or maybe figuring out how do I handle it better next time when I go to Aunt Peggy's house or whatever it is, right? Where you're set up for temptation or whatever, and you learn. It's a learning experience, and learning from it, not saying you're a bad person because you had sourdough bread one day or whatever it is,
That's so critical.
Yeah. And I say that, we're not perfect. We're not expected to be perfect. We don't have to be perfect. There's no right or wrong. You choose foods that support you or choose foods that don't support you. You have a choice. It's your choice. And if you choose to have something that's not as supportive or not supportive at all, it's not like being on a diet, one that you did before, where I'm a bad person, I've been bad, that's it, throw your towel in the air, what's the point, I'll just go back to the way I was eating before. You just say, that wasn't very supportive, now I'm choosing something better. And it's like being on a path and you've just come off the path and you just get back on it. And I think it's much easier to do when you're low carb and keto, is to just get back on the path, just get back on the path, just come back. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that you've come off. I never, ever berate my clients if they say, I had a pizza or I had something. It's just, did you go back to it the next day? Yes. Brilliant. Fantastic. That's all we need.
Yeah, I think the shame and the guilt has to come, it's such an obstruction to self-care, exactly what Brian was saying and what you're saying. If you struggled, well, learn from that. Now you learned a beautiful piece of information for your future self, right? Like I know when I go to my, vegan uncle's house that I'm going to need to eat before I go. Otherwise, I'm going to eat off plan. And if you do eat off plan, like you said, Jackie, if you are stuck in shame and guilt, and the food rules instead of how do I grow as a person, right? It's not going to help you. And a lot of times we harbor those feelings of shame and guilt when we go off plan. And, it's good to notice that you weren't happy with what you did, but to lament in that, it's not worth focusing on. It's, hey, what can I have done differently to make this easier, right? Or, did I just want it? If you just wanted that pizza, like, you have to live with that. Like that's okay. There's nothing wrong with it.
You just have to accept the consequences. Don't eat pizza every day. And they go, I didn't lose any weight. Well, just thinking about it is not going to do it. Right. So at some point you go, okay, I got to get to the gym. I got to do what I have to do. And so you kind of look and say, is it worth it? If I have to work out for an extra 2 hours to have that pizza, is it worth it? Nah, probably not. Right. Or even if it's not good pizza, or if your grandma makes pizza once a year and you go, it's a different situation. So I think there's a lot of that where it's, I think there's no place for shame and guilt and all this. And I think the problem is, a lot of people, we did Weight Watchers as a kid, and then you go out and you go off plan and people are upset with you. You have no willpower, you're not strong, and they blame it on you. So a lot of people just became victims because they think they don't have control or power over what they eat. It's really challenging.
Yeah. And it's not their fault. And we know it's not their fault. It wasn't their fault at the time. It's just the messaging we've been given over the years. And I never bought into the low fat stuff. So I always ate butter. I always ate the fatty bits of the lamb chops. I always ate the skin of the chicken. But the feelings around it was, I'm not very healthy. I'm not being good to myself. I shouldn't eat this. And all that stuff still came along for the ride because I thought I shouldn't be eating it, and now I can just enjoy it and know that I'm being healthy.
Yeah, I think that's a huge paradigm change when you go low carb. You understand that, hey, there's a way of eating that leads to non-hunger, and all these foods they told us not to eat, that they make me, they give me this way of eating that keeps me full, whether it's in the, immediately after eating a meal, or whether it's the next 4 hours, or it's the next 24 hours or beyond. You mentioned you cannot eat for a long period of time. I think you said 140 hours,
yeah.
Right? So, which is an astronomical amount of time not to eat. There's some people who haven't gone 1 day of their life without eating. So, the thing is once you feel that and you respect the power of that, you can come back to it. But you also know, as Brian said, there's ways to, abuse that, right? How many keto people have we met, who aren't losing weight? And maybe, their issues are the stress in their life, the lack of sleep, as Brian's talked about. Maybe they're adding a lot of fat where previously they didn't. Maybe they're doing a lot of keto replacement foods and treats. I mean, so, I think one of the most important things is that vigilance to, reevaluate yourself and where you are, and, what has changed and what's working and what's not working, because those signals in our brain, they change. I have, like I said, there's people coming here who've never eaten meat, and 1 year later, they're texting me pictures of them eating bacon, and they got bacon in their purse. Right, those signals are now different, and that journey, what their journey requires a year later is different than what they required when they first started.
Yeah.
Am I off base, Brian?
No, you're absolutely correct.
No.
I agree. Yeah, 100%. We all agree is that your desires are going to change. And I do believe there's a big role of the gut microbiome. When you starve out the bad ones, you put in the good ones, and you start feeding the good ones. Just like the good thoughts, you feed the good thoughts and not the bad thoughts. Your perspective changes. And and like I would go back to the podcast. I have people who are very successful, and what they do is they listen to different podcasts. They go for a walk. They listen to Vinny Tortures. They listen to us. They listen to you, and they get different perspectives, but they're out doing something instead of sitting there stressing out about the news and watching the same story for the next 6 hours of, how terrible everything is in the world. And I think sometimes just getting that positive perspective and changing your outlook on life makes a huge difference.
And I think when you change your diet, that all becomes possible. It all feeds into each other in that you now are more open. Now, because you're open to this new way of eating, you're also open to other influences and other things that before would have affected you in one way. You can almost let go of that and say, well, what else could I do? So, for example, I'd never before exercised. I didn't exercise at all. I'd see people around me. I had a cohort of friends who they were always going to the gym and doing stuff. And it's like, why would anyone do that? But when you change the way you're eating, now your body wants to move, and it's easier to move. I can walk up the stairs now. I can run up the stairs. I move quicker. I go swimming, and I've now taken up open water swimming. So I swam all through the winter in, from 6 degrees down to 3 degrees. Oh, that's Celsius. Yeah, almost freezing. And if I'd have done, I'd never been able to do that before. I wouldn't have even considered going into cold water. Before, I would go on holiday to the Mediterranean where the sea is lovely and warm, and I go, this is too cold, I'm not getting in. Or an unheated swimming pool in the Mediterranean and say, no, it's too cold, I'm not getting in. Whereas now, I'd go in at, 37, 38 degrees Fahrenheit, and I will get in that water and I'll swim for 15, 20 minutes because my whole mind set has changed. But not only that, the learning that comes with this, when you're on this journey, it's not just about the food. You understand about the sleep and the stress and what else you can do that's going to influence your body, improve your immune system, help you to feel better. So I do taekwondo, I do Dr. Ben's workouts. All these things come in, and they're not the chore that they were 5 years ago.
Yeah, and when you couldn't get off the ground before, now you're out swimming in the cold ocean. You have to look at your journey too, and where you came from and where you are. And another important topic that I would love to bring up, just because we've been talking about it, is, I just had a Zoom meeting with all my patients, and someone asked, "Hey, what do you do to reward yourself when you don't eat that food, when you eat healthy and when you're doing well?" And it was the responses were so interesting, because a lot of people are saying, my lady says, just the reward is not doing it, and knowing that you don't have to do it. You don't have to just have cake because everyone else is doing it. And the reward is that in itself, when you realize I'm not a victim to that anymore. And then, other people saying, well, when I get my clothes that are smaller, that's when I'm celebrating. I'm in a smaller size than I was, or, I'm a better person to be around, or I can go swim in cold water and do those things. And you start realizing the benefit of saying, hey, and then I think just the knowledge to say I have the power, because so many people, Troy, and I think you'll agree, is when they first come in, they go, I was doing so great that my husband brought home donuts and I had to eat them. I was like, well, why did you have to eat them? Why did you have to eat them? You didn't have to eat them. Did he force it on you? Well, they were there, so I had to eat it. Well, why? And so we try to reason those out. Like, why did you feel like you had to? Right. And because, Troy knows, like, number one is stress. Number two is lack of family support. So we can figure out who's going to have struggles just based on if their husband's bringing home cookies every night. Good luck. It's going to be a rough road.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The family involvement can be so critical. The having a great community and support system is so critical. And I think that us as doctors, we have to continue to expand that, right? We have to encourage that. And it's great to, Jackie, the community that you've created around your podcast, and the community you're a part of with PHC UK, and it's just it's inspiring. It's inspiring to see people doing this, worldwide. and the effect it's having. And I really think we're on the grassroots level of a big movement here. How do people find you besides listening to the Fabulously Keto podcast? How do they reach out to you? Where do they, if somebody wanted to hear more of you, what should they do?
Okay, so the website is fabulouslyketo.com. We have contact forms on there to get through to us. Facebook, Fabulously Keto, Facebook group, Fabulously Keto. Twitter, Fabulously Keto. Instagram is Fabulously Keto 1. Somebody had got that. That's really annoying. And she doesn't even use it. And I keep sending her messages saying, can I have it? But no response. And then I'm on LinkedIn, Jackie Fletcher. Just reach out. We're love to hear from anyone.
Anything on the horizon for you? Any big guests coming up, or any new excitement with the podcast, or anything personally?
I've got Dr. Tro coming on.
Oh my gosh, you're so lucky. He's great.
Yeah. So you've finally stooped to my level, huh?
Yeah. With fingers crossed with Dr. Seema Malhotra, who's coming on. He's going to be our guest for the 100th episode, hopefully, if we can get a recording.
He's doing awesome
date.
work. Yeah.
Nina Teicholz is coming on. I've got and Chris Kenobi. Got some great people that I met at the PHC conference a couple of weeks ago. So just, people that have just had an amazing journey. So always looking for new guests, whether they be people that are well known in the space or just somebody that has a great story to tell.
Awesome. Keep up the good work. It's an honor to have you on. Thanks for joining us. Keep up the fight. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. You too.